I think if
Mm-hmm.
you can be faithful to it, you're going to find that your goalkeeper is going to become a lot more successful in limiting those chances.
Yes, and I think that what underpins a great goalkeeper that's competent in the three things we're going to talk about today is courage, is bravery, and the willingness to try and explore, especially at the younger ages, right? Like, no one cares if you win the Thanksgiving showcase when you're 12, right? But those skills that you learn at a younger age definitely translate to when you're a little bit older and you're like, well, I have experience now. I have experience. I made that mistake and I'm not going to make it again, right? Like last year, I forgot my wallet at home and I went to the airport and my life was miserable for that entire trip because I had to be like groped and patted down and it took an extra half hour to go through security. It was terrible. And you know what? I have not forgotten my wallet again because I learned my lesson and it was trial and error and I made a mistake and I definitely learned my lesson, right? And sometimes we don't know unless we try. We have no idea how it's going to go unless we explore. And I just want to remind everybody that you are safe to try things. You are safe to explore things. You are supposed to make mistakes. You are supposed to make it is implied that while you're learning, that you're going to have some hiccups along the way and you're going to reflect and be like, that didn't really work out as what I initially thought. However, I made the best decision in the moment that I possibly could. Next time, I'll be more informed and it is okay to be a work in progress. I still am. I'm going to be 40 next year. I'm a work in progress and we have to have some grace for ourselves. Yes.
Amen. Without further ado, let's get into this list. Number 1, what do I do?
Number 1, let's work on preventing opportunities by protecting the space behind our back line. So let's say that the ball is either with our team or the opponent has the ball somewhere in our team's attacking half. So our jobs become 3 things. 1, protect the space and behind the back line. 2, communicate to limit opponents' opportunities. And 3, position so that if our team does get possession, that I could be an outlet or support the attack, right? So what that implies is that if the opponent has the ball outside shooting range, I am in a position that puts me in a position that I can potentially come out and clear the ball, pass the ball, head the ball, all the things in phase 1. Or if they play the ball into that space, that I would then be able to drop and still protect the goal area, right? Because let's say I'm 40 yards off my line. If I don't win that initial ball, I'm not going to be able to protect the goal. So we want to find that balance of where can I position myself to be able to come out and manage that situation before it becomes very dangerous. But if I can't, then I still want to drop back and protect the goal. And I think that takes exploration. And I think it's different in each circumstance. But what's one of the most important parts is that when my job is solely protect the space and behind the back line, that my body shape wants to reflect that. So if I said to Tori, you and I are in a race, and we're going to race to see who gets to that ball first, how would you start that race? You would start probably something similar to Noah Lyles in the Olympics, right? You're in a sprinter stance. Your weight's on your front foot. You're ready to go forward if you need to, but you're also ready to drop if you have to, right? And this kind of falls in line with our first rule of possession, out of possession. It is prevent when I can, react when I must. So my vertical positioning, your vertical positioning might be different based on our skill sets and comfortability and team strategy, XYZ. But if I can prevent an opportunity, I want to do that. If it's within my skill set, if I have to, then I want to react.
I think this is huge. And it's something that, a lot of goalkeepers, coaches, whether it's at the youth level or even as kids start to get a little bit older in high school, their coach is saying, stand higher, come higher up, come higher up. But I think what holds goalkeepers back is they're not really sure what they're supposed to do there. There's a nervousness about well, when we lose possession of the ball, do I immediately drop? So I think this is a really great rule of thumb or outline for them of you're higher so that you can be an option in possession if our team regains possession, or you're higher so you can limit that chance, come out, but you're not so high that you don't feel like you can retreat if need be. So right. I think this kind of labels it out for them quite well.
Well, I also think 2 more things. I think that simply having a position that's a little bit higher and connected to the back line could potentially even deter a threatening situation because the opponent is like, well, the goalkeeper's there, so I can't play it in behind the center backs. So if I want to play it, I've then got to play it in behind the fullbacks, which is a less threatening position for us and a less dangerous area of the field for our opponents, right? Go ahead, have the ball behind my fullback, because that will give us time for our center backs to get back, for me to get back in a position, for us to delay the attack and then get numbers back behind the ball, right? The second thing is, one, not only does it deter potential dangerous opportunities, but also I want to make sure that I feel competent in the different types of final actions outside my box, because clear the ball isn't the only final action that we could choose. It is one that we certainly could use, but the balls that get played in could be different, right? So the ball that's played from out to in is more dangerous than, let's say, in a central position outside. So if the ball comes from out to in, it's on the floor, that's going to be different than if it's in the air. So I want to be able to clear it. I want to be able to take a touch pass pressure. I want to be able to pass it on one touch, potentially emergency slide tackle if I have to. I've even seen Katie spread outside the box the other day, right? Which I thought was very inventive, and just being comfortable with these different types of balls that get played will determine what type of final action that we need to have.
Yeah. I think it's super helpful, and the more you can explore with it too, the more you're going to find, oh, I never thought I saw myself doing that, but I know that it's a tool that I have.
Right. Well, I also think another thing that deters people from being a little bit higher is because they don't understand the principle of when to stay high and when to drop, right? So they're like, I'm afraid I'm going to get chipped. Well, why are you getting chipped in the first place? Right? Like the ball's outside shooting range. You're not really worried about them shooting, right? So you can be a little bit higher. As soon as they play that ball and we recognize I can't get there first, that's your cue if you should go. Can you get there first and impact the ball? No. Then quickly drop to protect the goal. Then your job it transitions from space defense to goal defense. And that's where I think people don't make that decision quick enough. So the ball gets played and they stay where they are because they're like, I can't get it. So they're not sure what to do. They stay, and then the ball goes over their head. And so we have to find that right balance of starting position, yes, but the decision to be aggressive forward, or the decision to drop back and transition to protect the goal. And that's where people, I think, falter, and this becomes a little unclear in our job responsibilities.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, honestly. And I think that's a whole podcast in itself is about, and I think we might have talked about doing this in the past, but like how not to get chipped. It's not as scary, I think, as people make it out to be, because you have a lot more control in that situation.
Yeah. I mean, I call college soccer and pro soccer every weekend. You coach at college soccer, you watch the program. I don't really see goalkeepers get chipped too often. Like in my recent memory, I can think of one time, and it was like last week. It was Shelby Hogan against Portland, right? Or in Portland against Utah. And it was in a 1v1 situation where she came out and she was in a space. Let's unpack something. This just came to my mind. Let's unpack no man's land.
I knew that's what you were going to say.
Let's unpack no man's land, because I think it is this mythical place that is very ambiguous and vague, and goalkeepers are like, what does no man's land mean? I've heard it. It's this mythical place that I don't want to be in, but what the heck does it mean? And essentially, when someone says that, what I think they're saying is that you're not in a position to protect the space, and you're not in a position to protect the goal. And that's what happened in that one play. If you go back and look it up, is the goalkeeper is not in a position where she can influence the ball in phase one, and she's not in a position to protect the goal. And so the attacker just goes right over top of her head. So, yes, but that's what that means if you've ever heard that before. And typically it happens because we're not understanding of what our job is in that moment and phase of play.
Yeah. All right. Well, because we could go on about this, I think, particular instance forever, we'll cut it there, and let's go on to part 2 with our topic at hand of shot prevention.
Okay, so number 1, protect the space behind the back line. Number 2 is protect this space in the goal area. So deeper crosses, end line services, shallow crosses, corner kicks, any of those services in the box. If we can prevent a header, a volley, a scrum, all these bodies in the box that potentially could take deflections and ricochets. We want to do that. So what becomes really important in protecting the goal area initially, what I think is the most important part, is our position. So many times we see goalkeepers just get like sucked to that near post.
Yeah.
And so then it makes it more difficult for them because they've got to travel a further distance to impact the ball. But the better we get at protecting the goal area, the further the opponent has to serve from goal, which makes their opportunity less likely to be as threatening, right? I don't want to face a shot 3 or 4 yards from goal if I don't have to. I want 7, 8, 9, 10 feels a lot better to me than 3 or 4. So the better we get at protecting the goal area, the more comfortable we feel at punching, the more range we're going to have, and we're going to force our opponent further from goal.
Yeah. I think this is one of the biggest areas of growth for goalkeepers that we work with. I don't know if it's just like a topic that it's hard because you don't see it as much as a youth goalkeeper, and then all of a sudden it's like you're starting to see it. But as you transition from one level to the next, I think teams get better and better and try to do this a lot more. So it's an area that is super important for goalkeepers if they do want to try to be more preventative.
Yeah, for sure. And I think as well as if we feel more comfortable coming out to protect the goal area, typically our opponents are serving into that area because they've got numbers. And if we can come out and secure possession, then there's a potential for counterattack opportunities because the opponent has a lot of numbers pushed forward, which is another benefit. Yes. And we're now to number 3. That was simple. That was simple. That one was sweet. Number 3, which isn't always the most simple or sweet, is retaining possession. So 3 ways for you to be more preventative is 1, to protect the space behind the back line, 2, protect the goal area, and 3, help maintain possession. So this, I think, is where the position probably has evolved the most, even in like the last 5 years. And I think where we start here, Tor, is we talk about what does it mean to be good, quote, good with your feet.
Yeah. Welcome to the Keeper Institute podcast. My name is Tori Corsaro. I'm a strength and conditioning and goalkeeper coach here at the Keeper Institute and your host for today's show. The Keeper Institute is a unique goalkeeper training facility in New Jersey aimed at developing better goalkeepers and better people. On this podcast, we will be discussing all things goalkeeping, character development, and more. Welcome back to another episode of the Keeper Institute podcast. I went extended air horn.
What is an air horn used for? Like that kind? Just in like club music?
I feel like, yeah.
Okay,
so our team has this speaker that they press, like they'll be listening to music and you can press the air horn when you want.
Oh, right. Okay.
And it adds a little flair. Like it makes you want
to... Like Jersey Shore.
Yes. Yeah. Jim Tan Laundry. Thank you for noticing.
GTL.
Okay. Well, that's goalkeeping. Enough Jersey Shore. I know we're in Jersey, but it ain't like that.
Yeah.
Although I would love to bring back fist bumping.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to talk about developing your presence. I think this is something that a lot of people come to us and ask about. Mm-hmm. And it's like one of those things where it's like, we can talk about it, but you gotta be about it. You gotta do it. So instead of just having someone say, hey, you gotta have more of a presence out there, we're going to try to give you 3 tips to actually achieve that, because it's really hard when someone's like, hey, do this, but then doesn't give you anything to try to do. So this is going to be our attempt at giving you that and making it something that you can really just manage, really add into your game.
Right. I mean, you can tell a noticeable difference when someone has a really good presence and when someone doesn't. And like, it really does. I know that I can't quantify this with a stat or a number, but I really do think that it does put pressure on the opponent in a different type of way, where the goal then becomes smaller and the goal feels like it's smaller, and it forces your opponent to have like inch perfect type finishes, which means that they have less room for error. So I think statistically it really does pay off to have presence. And I think the coolest thing about presence is that it can be interpreted differently up to the individual, just like the position. And so just because you don't communicate loud and very often or like wildly crazy and like lots of personality, that doesn't mean that you can't have a presence.
Yeah. For sure. I think that's huge. And I think it's something that you can develop over time. It doesn't have to be like overnight. It's like just add these things in and put them in your game. And I think it starts to feel less like uncomfortable and more just like this is a part of my game and this is who I am as a goalkeeper.
Right.
Without further ado, let's crack into it. Step number 1, figure out your X factor. What does it mean to figure out your X factor, Joe?
What do you feel the most confident and competent with in terms of your goalkeeping? For me, it was protecting the goal area. So I knew when the ball was coming into my range, I was 100% coming. I was coming very, very aggressively, and I was making a decision to go up strong, whether that was to punch or catch away, but I was going to influence that ball when the ball came in. And that forced opponents to serve further from me, which means if they did get a shot, it was going to be from further away and giving me more time to react. So I was very aware of that X factor, and I played to that X factor as much as I possibly could, and was just very distinctly aware of how that was going to influence the opponent.
I think that's super important. How did you learn that that was your X factor, though? Like, was it an intentional thing? Was it coaches saying, "Oh, you're really good at this"? Because I think that everyone has an X factor, but if you're not intentional about being like, "Oh, I do have one, and here's what it is," then it can be hard to employ.
Yeah, I think it was revealed over time. It was just something that I felt really good about, and maybe people complimented me on the way, but it was just like, well, I feel really good in that space, and I feel really confident in that space. And so I'm just going to be hyper aware of the moments that I can go and influence the ball. And if it's a little gray, knowing that is my strength, I'm just going to go because that's what I feel most comfortable with. And I don't think it was a conscious decision in the beginning. It was more or less exposed to me within my training environment, or some of my teammates being like, wow, I don't want to go up for a cross with you because I know I'm going to get railed. Or like in video, in games, like that was revealed to me when I would come out and you could like physically see opponents just like deter their run away from like, yeah, exactly. Skirt. And then I do think though that the trick is to play to your X factor, but not so that it's a detriment, right? So sometimes our greatest strengths can be our biggest weaknesses, and we want to make sure that I know that claiming crosses is my X factor. It was in college, and so I need to make sure that I don't irrationally chase things, knowing that it's my X factor. So it's just subconsciously in my mind. In training, more specifically than games. In games, I want to rely on my instinct, but in training, I know, okay, I'm quite good at this. I'm going to continue to explore what my edges are. But in games, I'm going to rely on what my instincts are and not chase things, because in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, I'm really good at this, even if it's not a situation that I could influence.
Yeah, that is so important. And I know we've talked about it before, but like our strengths can't become, well, oftentimes our strengths do become something that we like can use as a detriment, but just being aware of it, I think kind of helps negate that. And there are going to be times where it still happens, but it's just all about being intentional. So much of life is about being intentional and being intentional about taking the time to say, okay, here's my X factor and here's how I'm going to use it. Here's what it looks like in this situation, that situation, and just kind of relying on those strengths without overdoing it. So overdoing anything is a bad thing, right?
Yep. Too much coffee makes me jittery.
Ain't that the truth? I had 600 milligrams of caffeine the other day and I didn't sleep for 2 days.
Oh, well, that's a problem. I don't know what the milligram situation is. I just drink until I feel like, okay, if I'm a little bit more is going to put me over the edge.
Yeah, it was not a good situation. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah.
But so on and so forth. Let's go on to number 2, communication. And I think this is this topic that people really seem to struggle with, and I don't know if it's kind of hard to teach thing, or if people don't spend the time teaching it. Is there a lack in like a tactical understanding of like what to say? Is it a confidence of how to say it, when to say it? But I think communication is an area that can, 1, really show your presence on the field, and 2, I think communicating and knowing what you're seeing and being able to articulate it can also breed a lot of confidence for a goalkeeper.
I totally agree with you. I think confidence, I think your question of like, why don't people communicate more? It is all rolled into one. I think that there's a few things that go into it. Is like communication, it depends on your game understanding, right? So a 10-year-old, they don't have a great library of game understanding, right? They don't have this like deep understanding of the game. And so they're just in there just reacting on what they see and like diving around and coming out being aggressive. And so I just want to normalize that 10-year-olds shouldn't really be great at communication.
Yeah.
Like that's okay. Even 14-year-olds, like your communication library should be somewhat limited to like 4 or 5 things. And if you did them in all the circumstances, you'd be a great communicator, right? But like when people say that you need to communicate, start with keeper and away. Like that's the easiest thing to communicate. And like you typically know if you're coming out or if you're not coming out, that you should say that and say that loud. And that just that one thing for a small or for a younger goalkeeper could really be a great difference maker. And when I'm coming, so it's funny that we bring this up because I was speaking to Maddie Prohaska the other day, and she was like, Jill, what do you think about this? She conceded a penalty, right? So she came out, it was like a longer ball into the box. She came out and she timed it wrong, and the player got to the ball first, and then she trucked the player, and they called a pen on her. And she was like, what do you think? And I was like, do you remember in this play if you yelled keeper? And she was like, honestly, I blacked out. I don't really remember. And I was like, the only reason I ask is because sometimes when you yell keeper loudly, it really does impact what the striker does, because they're looking up at the ball and they have no idea if you're coming or not, if you're going to time that right or not. And so when you yell keeper, that could like get them to shudder a little bit, and give you more space to come and take the ball. So communication, if you feel like it's not your strength yet, that's okay. Ask more questions about what you should say, when you should say it, how you should say it, right? Because I can't communicate urgently if a situation isn't urgent, because I'm losing some of my think of your communication as like a bank, right? You only have a certain amount of words and a certain amount of tone and urgency that you can say those words in a game before people start to drown you out. So think of it as like, okay, this is urgent. I need to communicate that urgent. The house isn't on fire, so I can just make a small adjustment and say, hey, Tori, slide to your left, right? It is an art. I think communication is an art, and it is something that you're not going to get overnight. And it's just something that you will develop over time. The more comfortable you get with understanding what the situation is that you're looking for, what triggers and cues you're looking for, and also just as you get more comfortable with your voice.
Yeah. I think less is more, especially if it's something that you're like, this isn't my strong suit, then less is definitely more. If it's something that you're like, I feel pretty good about this, then yeah, I do think your dictionary can get a little bit larger and your bank is a little bit larger to pull from. But I also think it's so, so, so important that you understand your teammates. What do your teammates need from you? Obviously, there's things that are like, you have to talk about no matter what, right? If someone needs to be like stepping, it's step, right? If you need your line to get up after a set piece, it's up, whatever your team's verbiage is. But I also think it's really important to have that relationship with your back 4 or 5 and kind of know what they're going to respond to and when, because the more that you have that communication between each other, sometimes the easier it can even become. And I think in club soccer and college soccer, like that becomes a little bit more manageable because you are practicing multiple times a week and playing with them multiple times a week, as opposed to maybe high school soccer or like a travel team where it's not as consistent. I think developing those relationships goes a really long way and making the communication feel a lot easier for you.
I think there's a lot that goes into communication. And if you guys want to know more about that, you should really check out TKI University, because we go over that in depth in one of our classes, like a beginner level communication and an in-depth level communication with different examples from we use from Spidio, which was really a great tool. It has a 360-degree view of the NWSL. And so it's really, really helpful in terms of like seeing what the goalkeeper sees and being able to spot those different triggers and cues of what's happening and how we can communicate. Because the more effectively we communicate, the more difficult it is for the opponent to score. So although, everyone wants to make saves and people equate saves as good goalkeeping, really, we don't even want those saves to happen. We want to prevent those opportunities. And I think the best goalkeepers in the world are the most preventative ones, because they don't have to face a ton of shots, right? So if we can communicate more effectively, then it would be harder for the opponent to score.
Yeah, I think you are onto something. A communication workshop could be in the workshopping stages, but I think that TKI University is the best way to learn, and there's just a lot of great insight and perspective, not only from yourself and Coach Chris coming in to talk with them, but just fellow goalkeepers getting to workshop together is huge. That's something you guys definitely want to check out if you haven't already. But won't keep you too much longer. The last way to develop a really great presence is also just to be yourself. You know you. You know what your X factor is now after doing this podcast. You have a couple ideas on how to communicate a little clearer, but also just being yourself and bringing your best can help us have a great presence as well. So let's use you, Jill. You knew you were great at protecting the goal area. You knew you're a really good teammate. You know that you were going to support and encourage. You knew that part of your identity was to be a hard worker. I'm sure if you brought all those things, your presence was just exuding out of you, and it made people feel like probably when they look at you like, wow, that's a confident goalkeeper.
Yeah, that when I reflect on my career, that was when I played the best, is when I had confidence, and not an external confidence of you telling me I was good, but an internal like belief in my skill set and my tools. And I knew what I was really good at, and I was going to try to bring that to the table as best I could every game. I think for me, the hardest part of my career and the trap that I fell into was trying to be someone else.
Yeah.
And, I played with the best goalkeeper that's ever played the position. And quite often every day, I just kind of thought, like, how can I be more like her? Because obviously people value her worth, and people value her contribution to this game. And so how can I mold my game more like her? And in essence, I lost myself, and I lost what I was good at. And every decision I made had hesitation behind it, or questioning, or it was like half in, half out of it. And every time I walked on the field, I played with like this crippling anxiety if I wasn't enough, because I continued to compare myself to her. And I think that there's an element of like, yeah, I want to pick and choose what I can and take from her and learn from her, and add some in possession elements from her game, but also not lose sight of what I'm really good at, what I bring to the table, and who I am as a player. And I think if I would have done that, I would have, one, played a little bit better, but two, probably enjoyed it more, because I was always thinking about what do I lack instead of what do I bring. And when you operate out of this like scarcity mindset, it's not as enjoyable, or you're like adding so much fear to like you're attaching fear to your identity, which to me, I don't think I truly was able to understand and reflect on that until I was done playing.
One, thank you for sharing, because I think that that's something that a lot of people could probably relate to. And I know it's not easy to always talk about like those things too. And just when you think about, yeah, I was not the best of myself because I was just sitting there playing this comparison game, which is, that comment has kind of come up in a few of the podcasts that we've done recently. And I think that there's a lot of like value in that, but it's so hard to be yourself. And if you can't be yourself, then like, how are you supposed to play with a certain presence or a certain confidence or a comfort to make decisions, right? Goalkeeping is all about decision making. So how can I do that if everything feels a little bit stunted and hesitated?
Right.
I think that that's so valuable. And I think that if you don't take anything else from that this podcast, I think it should be that. Rewind to listen to it again, because that's so important. And it just makes me think about it. Like before every game, like before we go out on the field, I just look at Kate, who's my goalkeeper at St. Joe's, and I just say, just be KT, have fun, because we don't need you to be anybody else. So if you're a coach or if you're a player, just how can you draw into just who you are? Know your X factor, know what you bring to the table, and know kind of like what is that characteristic that it just can't be shaken of you. No one can take it from you. I am brave, or I am resilient, or I am strong, whatever that is. Bring that to the table and just be yourself, because that is always going to be more than enough. And it's honestly all you can be is you.
Snaps. That's it at the end of the day. That's goalkeeping in a nutshell, right?
Yeah.
We're all so different, and we all interpret the position so differently. And I think having a keen understanding of who we are within the game, and that goalkeeping doesn't define you, right? Soccer doesn't define you. It's not your identity, and you're way more than your performance. But also just like, who do I want to be within the lines and within the confines of this game of football? which is so beautiful and lovely, but also really hard to retain that sometimes.
Yeah.
All right, Tori.
I'm gonna write that down. Sorry.
Speaking of football, my question of the day, question of the podcast for you.
I'm excited for this.
Yes. What is your least favorite part of the game?
I think this is going to be a hot take, and maybe I'm just like, I'm triggered. But I had my first experience as a coach with VAR this year.
Mm-hmm.
I despise it. I don't hate a lot of things in this world, but like, I felt that as a mid-major who doesn't have VAR versus like a school that does, they knew when to call for it, and they were just anything that happened, they were like, VAR check, VAR check. There was 10 extra minutes on the game. I was like,
oh wow,
what's happening?
Yeah.
So VAR, I don't like it.
Okay.
I'm over it.
That is your personal opinion. I do like, in college it's called video review. It's not called VAR. It's called video review. I particularly really like it because I think it reduces the amount of errors that happen in a game, which if, let's just say you were the beneficiary of it, right? Like someone was offside, you thought they were offside, they score, referee goes back and watches it. Oh yeah, they were offside. I think that you would probably like it a little bit more because you're in theory getting the answer right, correct? VAR, on another hand, I think probably adds more people to the mess because you still get the human error element of bringing in another human being. And like, when do you even call for VAR checks? It's a whole process. So I can understand. I validate your experience. I just also want to say that there are times where it is good because it's supposed to reduce the human element.
I did warn you that I just think I'm slightly triggered.
Yeah, that's fair. I
know my shortcomings, and I know that if it worked out in my favor, maybe I'd be singing a different tune.
Yeah, true.
But that's what happens when you lose with 3 seconds on the clock.
That's fair. Okay, validate your experience. My least favorite part of the game, more recently, because you guys know I'm an analyst and then to be so, my least favorite part is seeing all these fake goalkeeper injuries, right? Recently, it is under my skin, crippling anger when it happens, when I see a goalkeeper go down with no contact. They're literally smiling because they don't know the camera's on them and they have to pretend to fake an injury, and they're not actresses or actors, and it completely it is a perversion of the rules, in my opinion, because yes, the goalkeeper, when they do go down injured, don't have to come off the field because they're the goalkeeper, obviously, and they're not penalized for that. But also, it's just taking away from the spirit of the game, because in our game there are no timeouts, and in the game there are no times to make tactical adjustments and stop momentum like there are in basketball. Like basketball, you're giving timeouts to be able to do that. But in soccer, it is not that way. And it is a huge irritation of mine that I think that FIFA needs to regulate and like force maybe a field player off for a certain amount of minutes. And you know that you're only going down injured if you are really hurt, because you're going to have to sacrifice playing down with 10 players for an extended period of time, whatever it might be.
I hear you. It's not the same as gamesmanship. I think that people probably will give you that, but it's not the same.
No, it is
I
not.
validate your experience, Jill.
Thanks. Because you know why? This is my irritation. Is the other night in my game, there was 15 minutes of stoppage time and there was no VAR checks. Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy.
Like, think about before VAR. You would never see 15 minutes on stoppage time unless someone was leaving in an ambulance or on a stretcher. Wild. Anyway, I'm off my soapbox. FIFA needs to regulate it, and goalkeepers stop going down fake injuries.
Yeah, goalkeepers, chill out. Stop doing it. Coaches, stop asking them to do it. It's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. All right, you guys, we love that you got to hang out with us today. We love hanging out with you. If you have any feedback, please reach out to us. You can reach out to me personally at jloyden@thekeeperinstitute.com. You can send us a message on Instagram, whatever. We want to hear from you. We want to hear about your experience, how this helps, how this hurt, what you need more support with. We are literally doing this for you, to help you in Northwestern North Dakota who never gets to see or come to TKI, or to the person that we see on a weekly basis. We love you. We care about you. You're not alone. Goalkeeping is really hard. It requires so much vulnerability. And because of that, you step on the field every week and you step on that field with so much strength.
Word. And if we don't see you and you're from the Midwest, North Dakota, the West Coast, we'd love to see you. So make sure you join us for one of our camps or something this summer. But for now, we'll catch you later.
Catch you later.